Thank you. So Kelsey, I think you can just start your presentation. You're muted.
I realized that, and then I quickly found the unmute button. But first, can we see my screen? Valuing Low Tech. Awesome. Great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the session today. Today, we will be discussing how to better utilize and scale low-tech sanitation solutions, specifically in the Americas. I think most of us in this room are familiar with some kind of low-tech sanitation system, whether right now you're picturing a pit latrine, a composting toilet maybe, or even a septic tank. These solutions, low-tech sanitations, are key cornerstones of many ecosystems. But we're here to discuss how we can best utilize, scale, and adopt them. So I'll quickly go over kind of the plan for today. So we will do a quick introduction. It's not just me, myself, and I talking. I'm joined by fab, wonderful WASH colleagues today. And then we'll first kind of dive into, well, if we're going to look at how to scale these solutions, what are low-tech sanitation systems? So what's the definition that we can land on for this conversation today? And then we'll ask ourselves, okay, are low-tech sanitation solutions valued? What is valued in sanitation ecosystems across the world? What is low-tech sanitation competing with? And kind of get a sense of where we are today with low-tech solutions. And then we'll move lastly to the juicy question of today and kind of make it all participants as well. Would love to get at least 2 people to join the conversation as well in terms of how we can increase the value of low-tech solutions. So those are the 3 questions we are tackling today. I will start with the introductions. So first and foremost, my name is Kelsey McWilliams, and I will be moderating this session. I am an independent circular sanitation consultant. My company, Point of Shift, is focused on increasing the amount of circular sanitation solutions in our world through design, implementation, and advocacy. As I mentioned, I'm surrounded by some great colleagues, so I'd love to introduce you to Jasmine Burton.
Awesome. Hey, y'all. My name is Jazz. I'm really excited to be here. So I am a toilet designer, public health practitioner, the founder of a social enterprise called Wish for Wash that seeks to bring innovation to sanitation with a culturally specific research, design, and education lens. And I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm really excited to be joining this panel. I would also like to recognize the traditional and ancestral lands of the Muskogee and Cherokee tribes of Georgia, upon which I am learning, working, and advocating today. So looking forward to diving further into the conversation.
Thanks, Jasmine. I'd love to introduce Kim Worsham.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, my name is Kim. I am a water and sanitation consultant, really focused on the business side of working on water and sanitation solutions. Started a company called Flush, and Flush is really focused on bridging demand and supply for sanitation. On the demand side, really creating these edutainment opportunities for the general public to learn and get enthusiastic about sanitation and destigmatize conversations. While on the supply side, really trying to help organizations working in and around sanitation to improve their internal management systems. So that means data systems, marketing systems, professional development systems. So really excited to talk about toilets today. It's something I love talking about, and I hope that we can all create ourselves as sanitation superheroes, because I think it's really important for us to really own it and make it kind of mainstream and fun. Thank you.
And it is an amazing shirt, Kim. I'd like to introduce next Paulo Shinchi.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm an activist. I have been in social movements since forever. Mainly, I work supporting grassroots communities across Brazil, sometimes South America in general. And it is, well, you've probably seen that my internet connection isn't that great. It's because I'm in the field. But I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much.
Paula, it looks beautiful, and if we have time today, maybe we'll make you give us a tour of your beautiful setting. And next, I would like to introduce Julia Wetcher.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here today, and
as Kelsey said, my name is Julie. I am calling in from Chumash ancestral lands on the central coast of California. And I spent 12 years practicing water and sanitation and hygiene internationally, mostly in Eastern Africa and Southeast Asia, before switching over last year to join the Dig Deep team, which does helps people in the US who don't have access to running water and sanitation. And I joined their team as the Chief Program Officer, and I'm really happy to be with everyone today.
Thanks. And last and certainly not least, Al Smith.
Hey everybody, my name's Al. I am a civil engineer and water treatment operator and wash enthusiast. And my main interests are working in small and disadvantaged communities. And I'm also a project lead for Dig Deep's decentralized wastewater innovation cohort, which brings together community-facing organizations working on decentralized wastewater issues. And so this talk today is actually quite timely because there's a lot of good work being done around the US and elsewhere focused on these kind of solutions. So very happy to be part of the discussion and looking forward to it.
Great. And then also we do want to make this as cohesive and including everyone's expertise in the room. So we have two kind of tools to help us with that. One, we have a mural board, and this is kind of the main tool we'll use to capture everyone's input, expertise, tying into the conversation at large. So we will be sending that through the chat now. And then also we do have I think we do have a typical chat function. We do. Sorry about that. So I'll be sending the mural. There's the mural, and chat for questions or comments or things that you also agree with. We'll try to answer them if they fit into the conversation. But with that, we can dive right in and kind of start on what is low-tech sanitation. For me, I think I will give one layer. My favorite part of low-tech sanitation, or I think a really important concept, are systems or solutions that are mimicking nature as much as possible, whether that's an angle of being passive, whether that's an angle of returning nutrients or reutilizing nutrients in another form. To me, that is kind of one of the cornerstones that should be in low-tech sanitation. But there are a lot of layers to this. So would love to first push it to Jazz. In terms of Jazz, what is your thoughts? What is low-tech sanitation to you?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Kelsey. So I mentioned I'm a toilet designer trained in product design, really kind of rooted in design thinking and human-centered problem solving. And I think for me, low-tech sanitation and sanitation at large is really about products that need to be more accessible, right? Accessible, affordable, and aspirational options that meet various and diverse market needs. Recognizing that not all sanitation norms, behaviors, and cultural nuances are the same, and that should be, included in the product development and how, sanitation options are marketed, how they're produced, and how they're rolled out across, the Americas and globally, I think as well. So I do think, in terms of product development and the front end of the sanitation value chain, having things that are intuitive, things that are easy to use, I think, sometimes, depending on your relationship with things like compost toilets, it might be, you might have a lot of behavior change that you have to go through, right? It might be really challenging for you to adopt that new norm. So how might we use design thinking and creative problem solving to make these opportunities, these new product development options available, accessible, and easy for people to use? So for me, that's a big piece of what low-tech sanitation is and should be.
Absolutely. And I think that availability and accessibility are key. To your point, it layers so well in terms of a lot of low-tech solutions fall quickly into low cost and then fall quickly into being super cumbersome on the end user. But Kim, I know you have a lot of thoughts on the business model as well in some aspects.
Yeah, and just to reflect, I think what Jazz's definition of low-tech sanitation is very much in alignment with what I think of as low-tech sanitation. I think of it often on the business side too, trying to think of sanitation technology that is also resource independent. It doesn't require a lot of energy. It doesn't require a lot of other things that need to get put in, but also it doesn't require a lot of maintenance. So thinking about how do you minimize the cost of running the damn thing, on the ground in the household, but also and on the municipal level. But when you think about it too, from a business standpoint, making sure that, like what Jazz is saying, it's an aspirational thing, but you test this on the market where you're at. You're not just creating this low tech solution and saying this is, you know, well engineered, it's a marvel, it's wonderful, and then 5 people end up using it because it's just not really market savvy. Because, you know, basically, if you don't have a product that people want to use, it's not a solution, it's just an object. And so we need to really think about low tech sanitation in terms of the solution, and really thinking on that human side. How do we make sure that what we're creating is valuable to the people, and it's low tech, but also low tech to them as well? Because low tech to the practitioner and the business might be, oh, we don't have anything we have to do for it. But if you put that burden on the consumer, you know, then is that really low tech at all?
No, absolutely. And I think too, we're getting into some of the pain points of existing low tech solution, which I think is great for building out a aspirational definition, because absolutely it needs to be valued to be used by someone. And I think Julie and Al, I know you guys are working both in the field a lot in terms with implementers, and I'm sure would kind of agree and add to that as well.
Yeah, I think Kimberly's point really resonates with me, because when we think of low tech, especially, you know, for me sitting here in California, I think, you know, I want to make something that's easy and really simple, but a lot of times people who are using these, you know, technologies want something that meets their needs to the greatest degree possible. And so they're not looking for the most simple solution. So how can we find something that is both, you know, low cost, using of locally available materials, but also which, you know, isn't just kind of the lowest rung on the sanitation ladder, but something that really does meet the needs, really takes care of it, and, you know, is exciting in some way as well.
No,
Right.
Go ahead, Al.
Sorry, Kelsey.
No.
I would just piggyback off that, both what Julie said and what Kimberly said. Just, you know, low tech, it also needs to be regionally appropriate as well. You know, like what might work in one region of, you know, the world may not work in another. So for example, out in Colorado, septic systems with leach fields in general work just fine, and, you know, are generally considered low tech. I mean, you can go up the scale a few notches and they can get pretty expensive, but generally speaking, it's accepted. However, you take that same septic tank and leach field and you go up to Alaska where there's permafrost, or down to Alabama where there are clay soils, and it does not work. And so to me, low tech, you know, it recognizes that, you know, you want to mimic those natural processes, but they need to be the natural processes that are acceptable to that region as well. And to that end, I think that in the low tech space, you know, we need to be investing the same dollars that the high tech companies are investing to develop those solutions. And you just don't see it. You see a lot of the proprietary systems that are quite expensive and will get the job done. They've invested the time and resources to make sure that that product works. And if we want low tech to be as robust, then we probably need to find a way to do the same.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point on R&D, especially back to like low cost doesn't necessarily always mean low tech, and vice versa, kind of competing on the level that some of these solutions are putting out, because they are expensive and they are fancy, which we may need, and we'll get to that later. But Paulo, I know that you have sometimes, you sometimes do not use the term low tech sanitation, and I would love to hear thoughts and reasons around why as well.
Exactly, because like many, I think all of you pointed, it involves some natural knowledge and some social knowledge that are also forms of technologies. And they are very high technologies. When you look at all these indigenous knowledge, ancestral knowledge that people knew how to best use it. And it's extremely high tech, and how they develop their societies around how to manage their sanitation. So in that sense, I think we're looking at something that is in many cases high tech, and we need to redevelop this technology in many cities and urban areas to be able to actually value. Sorry, I'm jumping for future questions. I shouldn't, but but to really understand and understand how these grassroots communities have all these technologies already, and they need to be valued. So that's my point.
No, I think that's a great point on the term low tech versus high tech, already kind of pushing it towards how we should value it just by the use of low and high, and then leading on people who already have the technology to do these systems. So I think that's great. I have gotten a message from the translators, which I am terrible at this, but we'll try to do better for all of us to talk slower to help them with translation. So if I'm going too fast, please feel just to wave me down. Again, this is our passion for sure on the panel. So I think excitement kind of just revs us up. But with that definition, and also please feel free to ask questions in the chat or write your response in the mural too. We would like to collect some other thoughts and experience in this definition. But kind of what I have so far based on what everyone has said is kind of a regionally appropriate system that mimics nature, that is both aspirational and affordable and valued, with components that are easy to use and maintain. Am I missing stuff? Do we want to add stuff to it?
I think you should patent that and put it onto a plaque and give it to everybody working in sanitation.
Yes, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Maybe we should, go ahead, Al.
Oh, I was going to say, just echoing Kimberly, is a very beautiful distillation of what everybody said.
Perfect. Maybe I was going to say we should do these monthly chats where we take terms in the sanitation and try to come up with better definitions. Look out for that podcast or webinar. Great. So now that we kind of have this definition, we can move to the question, which I think, Paulo, you started to answer as well, in terms of where do these systems sit in terms of our value? Where does the desire for flushing toilets come? How did we get here in terms of what's even denoted as a low-tech system versus a high-tech system? I mean, we kind of answer that in the definition question, but getting a little more specific in terms of where are we valuing them? What use cases do we usually implement them to? And Paulo, I would love for you to continue your thought on how low tech is valued here.
Thank you. I think that the question has two sides, right? It's valued by whom? Is it valued by local communities who really need them? Yes, it is. Often a lot. But is it valued by mainstream people who are choosing where the dollars go, like Al said? It's not. So here in Brazil, I don't know if you have seen, but we actually had a system before that communities could receive some of these dollars to implement their technologies. And with a single bill, very short, no technical measures, this was ruled out, and now only large companies can operate. I'm making the whole story very short, but that's pretty much what happened. So it has not been valued. And I think it has to do with modernity on how we deal with our excrements. But I think I can build more on that later.
No, I think that's a great point. And I'm really happy you brought that up in terms of the to whom of this question as well. In terms of people who are putting money versus people on the ground can be quite different in terms of the value that they're seeing. And I think that ties into a lot to Kim, a lot of your work in terms of public toilets and how did we get to some of these current systems, especially in the US in terms of our strong love for sewerage system. I think would be great to tie in here.
I love talking history of toilets. I actually have the history of toilets class tonight, so I'll be talking toilet history all day. I think the interesting thing to remember is we've been using, human civilizations have been using sewerage systems for up to 5,000, 6,000 years. They are such a kind of classic way to take care of our waste, to just push it somewhere else, and using water as a really passive way to do a lot of that transportation. So I think when we think a lot about low-tech solutions, I think for people who don't necessarily work in sanitation the way the rest of us do, or maybe don't think of it as much, they're thinking of, well, what have we been using for centuries and millennia? Oh, it's sewers. That must be the easiest way to go. And same with, public toilets as well. So when we think about having these low-tech solutions that now kind of include a transportation quality to it, that's something that a lot of people don't think of as low-tech, because the flush and forget mechanism of having sewered systems is so easy and is considered low-tech, especially until you get to the treatment side. Really is kind of really low-tech in a lot of ways, just because water's doing all of the hard work for you, and pushing it and using gravity really to push that water to where you want to get it treated, not realizing that the system itself is very expensive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not low tech. It's just really expensive to put that low tech system in. And I think that means that sometimes in the 1800s, I know I'm going off on this history kick right now, but in the 1800s is when we've really double down on these sewer systems in modern cities, and really saying this is the easiest and cheapest way for everybody to manage their sewer systems without putting them on the streets, without putting your waste on the streets. And it's kind of created this culture of that's how we value it, is just get it out of the way. And having these new nurturing systems that are compost toilets, why they have been around for a long time, they didn't really catch on because they weren't so easy for the end user to use. So I think the value side is the tricky part, because people don't value it, and they value the systems that get it out of the way, out of their lives as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I absolutely agree in terms of the convenience of sewers. And I think you brought up a really great point too, in terms of some of the components of these systems. You look at a sewer and the toilet and the water base, though in our newly revised low tech definition in terms of being resource light, it's very low tech in terms of a passive system that's not using a lot of energy and using just water to transport waste, which I think is super unique and challenging to this. I think we have a lot of different viewpoints of people who value different things, who see different components and their pros and cons. So really exciting. I know Al, with your engineering experience, I'm sure is keen to add on to the sewer and what we value and how we could do better.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's an interesting question, right? Because that's where we always kind of lean to, and I think that there are plenty of circumstances where sewer systems do make sense. I mean, the point of it is it's a passive system that creates a sanitary barrier between us and the conveyance of waste. And so, not that it shouldn't be used, but it should be used only where it's appropriate. And there's probably a lot of places where there aren't. And then also with this whole with the low tech idea, is one thing that occurs to me with the centralized systems, and is how, so those have scale and efficiency to them when you get at like city wide scales, right? And so the dollar per user to flush makes sense in some contexts. Once you get out into rural areas and places where you don't have convenient places to treat in centralized systems, there's also a component that's kind of implied in the centralized systems. You also need a receiving body to deal with all the liquid streams that you're reintroducing into the environment, hopefully at a level that's acceptable. But as soon as you get away from the high density context, it becomes very challenging to do those systems at scale, because if you've ever looked at returning any kind of liquid stream to groundwater, and the treatment required for that, you need a lot of land to do any kind of leach field treatment, or maybe constructed wetlands or other low tech innovative ideas. And so that's where I feel like we need to increase the value in the discussion, is how do we get those those concepts in the decentralized and the low tech space to have those same economies of scale that the centralized systems have, so that they can be implemented more frequently and more thoroughly. And so that's, I guess, just trying to highlight that there, it's not that centralized systems are bad, it's just that they're not appropriate. And there's some, I can't remember what the number is, I bet Kim knows right off the top of their head, like the majority of systems across at least the US are decentralized systems. And so it's a big challenge to overcome.
I have to say, I teach my classes a lot in New York City, and how many New Yorkers have asked me when New York City is going to become a compost toilet city is hilarious, because I'm like, do you not understand the complications of installing compost systems in such a dense place? And it's kind of, again, it really brings home that idea of people don't really know what they're valuing, where they think they want the compost toilets until they realize the logistics are so complex, like in a particularly urban setting, that it just doesn't make sense. Or they want to have that compost toilet, but then it's like, where are you going to put that waste when you're done using it? There's, the houseboats in London are having issues with compost toilets, because I know this is not the Americas I'm talking about, but they have issues because they have compost toilets, and they end up having to bin their compost waste on the piers because they don't know where else to put the waste. The urban setting has not figured out how to accommodate those kinds of technologies.
No, I think you're spot on. And then I do know the Container-Based Sanitation Alliance, what they've been thinking about, Kim, to that point, is trying to connect sanitation closer to your garbage, so that you're taking out your compost in a way that you're taking out your waste. But yeah, all great points. And I'm loving these different kind of filters in terms of value, in terms of, we have the stakeholder, we have at what scale, we have what are we competing against. And Julie, I know you're doing a lot of great work at Dig Deep in terms of talking to implementers on the ground as well, and would value your input here.
I mean, I don't know that I have too much to add to this great input by my colleagues. I think just one perspective that I've been thinking as we've been discussing this is remembering the end user. And we're talking about people with very busy lives, as we all have, and especially for individuals with limited resources or low income. This is not necessarily going to be what they want to spend their day planning out and thinking about, and probably not how they want to spend limited resources. And so what can we do to make it super easy, very straightforward in terms of knowing what their options are, knowing what's available to them, making it cheap, affordable. All of those things I think definitely need to stay in the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key barriers too to some of these solutions, tying back to Kim's New York compost question. I mean, they do get nutrients at the end of the day, but they don't get them in the way that they're thinking in terms of for their home garden. And Jazz, I know you're working on a few decentralized low tech sanitation models.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all of this is exactly on point. And I think just to build, I think the concept of building off of what Paulo said, I love that, what knowledges are we valuing, and sort of identifying that the lived and learned knowledges, they're different, and recognizing that there is a high level of sophistication of something that we might identify as low tech. It is, very high tech in a lot of ways. And I think recognizing that is an important shift that I would love to see the sector make. And then I think too, recognizing that, we have products, off-grid sanitation or low-tech sanitation, products on the market. We don't have a diverse offering. I will say that in my mind, showcases a value preference towards, certain market segments. At Wish for Wash, we talk about people who are opting off grid, right? So if you're living in a tiny home or an RV, or, you're choosing this lifestyle, and there's a lot of product offerings that are coming into development to meet those market needs. But then when you look at folks who are forced off grid, who maybe are experiencing homelessness or in indigenous, reservations, you don't see as much innovation happening or as much focus. So I will say, I think in terms of product development, so you see, really really low tech, I would say, is like glorified buckets where people are like, oh, certain market segments have nothing, so therefore we should just give them this bucket, which again doesn't keep the end user in mind, doesn't make that an aspirational, dignified, and healthy experience. But I do think there's a ton of really awesome product designers. Mona from Mosan, she's working in Guatemala. Virginia from Luwat, working in Madagascar and the UK. Daigo with Sato, all again, product design thinking lens, making it clear that you can have a container-based off-grid sanitation solution that still is a dignified human experience that I think can meet various market segment needs. So I think, yeah, we have a lot of things in our pipeline at Wish for Wash that are sort of researching and kind of discovering what potential options could exist. I personally am excited about the future of septic tanks. I think that there's a ton of opportunity to innovate there. Coming from Georgia, there's case studies after case studies of failing septic systems, and you see hookworm outbreaks. And it's like, particularly if you're, buying a home for the first time, and you're buying a home that has a 30-year-old septic tank, and you're not prepared for that $30,000 cost. Like, that model is not sustainable for anybody. So I think that there's a ton of opportunity to think about folks that are forced off grid, whether they know it or not, and potential innovation in that space.
Yeah, I think that design focused lens and who's getting the most of that design focus is such a great question. And I haven't heard, Jazz, many people recently this year be excited about septic revolution, but I feel like it's coming, and it so needs to happen both on price points and both just septic tanks have a place, they do. But I think, to your point, there's much better ways to innovate on that idea.
Yes.
Great. Well, I do know it's Thursday, and I know this is one of the last days of this, so I'm not super heartbroken that the mural is empty, but I understand it. But I wanted to continue. So we've kind of landed at this low tech. How is it valued? And we have all of these filters that it's valued for different people, for different stakeholders. The knowledge of low tech is valued differently. The scales are differently. And how we design and innovate is differently and different valued. And I think that's a great place to continue to our final question, the juicy question, we'll call it, of today's session, is how can we do more to increase the value or increase the amount of low-tech sanitation solutions that are valued by the right people in the right regions, in the right directions? And I know I've been calling on all the panelists individually, and I can still do that, but feel free to also jump in and add on as well. And Paulo, I would love to start with you here as well to kick us off.
Thank you very much. I just wanted, before I started that, I was thinking on what Kim said on the history of sanitation, about how government relies on the governmentality that is created by sanitation, right? We saw that with Haussmann creating Paris when they make the grid streets. It's also the way you count the number of people, you count how much they consume. And importantly, here, especially south of the wall, governments often use water to control where people can live, right? I'm recently, yesterday actually, there was this huge land grabbing movement where land grabbers were supported by the government, and they cut water for 12 days in a community, and then they arrived with the police and with riflemen, militias, and they kicked out the people who were living there for 30 years. So this is a form of governmentality, but also how they register, how you are trained to participate in the city, what makes you a citizen. If you don't, in Brazil, if you don't have access to water, then you cannot prove your residency, then you cannot have a job, then you cannot get credit. So your access to citizenship is intermediated by these government infrastructures. It's part of why what we are calling low tech is not valued, because it's very valued when you can use it as a form to govern. And when we look at how we can increase low tech, then it is directly connected, right? Because it is the power from the grassroots communities that threatens this form of governmentality that's top down, that's very vertical, very so for me, if we're looking at how to increase the value of low tech, we're looking at how to strengthen grassroots communities, how to strengthen knowledges that are there, that we can share, and we can help to scale up. We scale up the knowledge at the same time that we scale down the application. And yeah, I think I would go through that side.
No, absolutely. I think strengthening the grassroots communities is key to limiting people abusing some of those systems, to your point earlier. Yeah, would love to pass the mic to Kim here as well in terms of how we could increase the value of low tech.
I've been thinking a lot about this while Paola was talking too. There actually was a movement in the 1830s about compost toilets in the US. So it became kind of a movement in the UK. It kind of started in Connecticut as well, where they were trying to start the Earth Closet movement and really trying to champion it as a rural solution, a solution for communities that had gardens, that were farmers. Oh my God, isn't this so much better than using a chamber pot? Oh my God, isn't this so much better for our gardens? Look, we have all of this free fertilizer, right? And or fertilizer that is like coming from our households and it smells nice. We put it on our ground. Oh my God, I have tomatoes now. And it was a pretty cool movement until the sewer systems really took on with a vengeance in the 1850s. I actually think there's some lessons to learn there in terms of how we communicate about low-tech solutions, especially on the compost side, talking about what are the benefits, and to, you know, what everyone else has been talking about, making sure that we're targeting these messages to the right people. If it's a community that don't have gardens, maybe don't market it as a great, you know, solution for you, because you don't care if you have compost, you know, fertilizer for your garden because you don't have any or you don't want it. But there are communities that do want that stuff and do want to find, you know, better solutions than going and getting artificial fertilizer, right? That hurts the environment. But there is something there. And I think the other thing is changing this dialogue into making it a public dialogue, right? And not just having this internal conversation in the sector, but really making sure we're bringing in the media, bringing in people, having those champions who do, like, I don't know if I'm dating myself talking about Cribs from MTV, but having a Cribs where Gwyneth Paltrow has a compost toilet and talks about how amazing her life is with it, and kind of having these champions that can help create that you know, inherent value that people perceive on these low-tech solutions. And with that, making sure that those conversations are happening in the right areas. So it's not that you're talking about septic tanks in Atlanta, you know, where they have clay, or in the South in general, but making sure that that's being targeted for Colorado, making sure that you're talking about this in, you know, the like in Ithaca, New York, where there's a lot of like farmers interested in like revolutionizing. There's places that want this information, but we have to make it digestible, and we have to make it, I don't want to use the word sexy, so I'll use the word glamorous. We have to make it more glamorous to really think about, oh my God, this is going to make my other parts of my life easier, and thinking of it beyond the toilet.
Yeah, and I think that ties really nicely into Jazz's point earlier too, versus the people who are choosing to go off grid and increasing the value with them to get it more mass stream, while understanding and still designing and putting a lot of money towards the people who are forced off grid and making sure those are equal. So I think that's spot on, and would love to see a Cribs compost style tour. You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first, folks. But yeah, would love to tie it back to you too, Jazz, to see what you think in terms of how we can increase some of these solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, all that's been said is really kind of in line with what I think too. I think, yeah, in terms of how we communicate about these, you know, diverse technology options, right? I feel like first we need to increase the pipeline of innovation. So I think that's like a big need. And anyways, I think we need to create a pipeline of engineers, designers, makers from diverse walks of life and backgrounds that are interested in innovating in this space. So I think that's a big gap that hopefully we'll start seeing more of in the near future. But I think too, once we have a lot of those options, it is about kind of communicating in a way that resonates with diverse users, right? And I think, I know, Kelsey, we've talked about this a lot, like the notion of sustainability movement right now, for some folks, it's a very aspirational kind of elitist movement that isn't within reach, right? So if you are talking to folks that are they don't have a lot of time to really kind of be involved with their sanitation, infrastructure, and they just want something where they can continue living their life, what are some of, how can we create solutions, but then also communicate about those solutions so that they know that there's a value add to themselves and their society without it being like such a big time burden on them. And I think that that's something that needs to be recognized, that we have some incredible things, but if it takes up everyone's day just so that they can have the compost at the end, a lot of folks are not going to buy into that. So I think, it is a matter of increasing the product offerings, increasing the pipeline of those who innovate in the space, but then also making sure that we're communicating, in different ways to recognize that there's different norms and realities so that everyone can sort of see that they can play a role in buying into these new innovations and ultimately kind of advocating for a more circular society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that time is key. And I do also want to ask you and everyone too, like, what is that ideal system? Like, does the system exist right now, or is it small innovations, or is it large innovations to get to a better product, right?
I think personally, I don't think it exists. I think that there's a lot to still be done in terms of things like user experience, intuitiveness, like the fact that, it does take so much time and money and resources to make sure that your compost is actually composting. Like that, I feel like that's an engineering problem. I feel like that's something that, if we have enough incentive and enough reason for people to want to design around that, we could improve that. I think in terms of the septic model, I do think that's within reach to really make that a better user experience for folks who live on septic. But I also think, ultimately it would be awesome to see like a menu of options where it's like, hey, like, who are you? Where do you live? And like, what is your price point? And you can sort of pick and choose kind of your sanitation reality based off of that, so that there's like a suite of options. So you can sort of live a more sustainable life, but you also don't have to change your entire lifestyle to be more, circular or more kind of sustainable. So that to me, I think would be the coolest thing ultimately one day to see.
That would be super cool. And you could probably also add a filter too, in terms of your level of involvement. Like there's some people who want to get down and dirty, and like far and few between for sure, but it would be great to include that in the menu as well. And then, Julie and Al too, how can we increase the value of these systems?
If I wanted to piggyback off something Jasmine had said, and just the idea of low tech, if you don't mind, Julie, if I jump in there. One thing that occurs to me is can it still be considered low tech if there's some sophistication to it? So like with the example of the composting toilet, and does anybody want that headache? I mean, if you're gonna, who wants to head out, on a daily or weekly basis with the shovel and the turkey thermometer to figure out what temperature it is, if it's sat long enough, if you've turned it over enough, and that's the time component. But with a pretty simple temperature monitoring and maybe an automated paddle mixer in a vault that's there's still air getting in there, could some increases in tech actually even though we're still calling it low tech because it's composting, could that still meet the definition if it facilitated the ease of use for the end user?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like my answer is yes to that, but would love to hear any other responses.
Yes, I 100% think that would be incredible. And I think too, sort of as we're kind of marinating on all these points, like, to your point, Al, I think, we want people to feel like they can, opt into these technologies. We want people to feel like they can make these, changes to advocate for a more circular society. And so if we are choosing between the definition of low tech or the term low tech and the user experience, I think the user experience, in my opinion, would win every time. And we could also use that as an opportunity to potentially even move away from the concept of low tech, like Paolo said. And what is this if it's not low tech? What's another term for it? And I think, yeah, that's a great question.
I love all of this. I just also want to reiterate, we can't have these conversations unless we're going to actually have people feel comfortable with the dialogue. So we need to make sure that if we're going to have these abilities to create really end user appropriate technologies, that people are part of the conversation and they feel comfortable. Because right now, I don't know that many Americans who are willing to have a conversation about what toilet they want. They just want to go to Home Depot and get something off the shelves and not talk to a human being, maybe do a little Google searching, and then applying it and really not thinking about it because it's something that's so off-putting, and I think there's this dialogue that we need to build, to Paolo's point too, creating these grassroots opportunities for people to feel comfortable talking about this and understanding, well, why do I feel so uncomfortable talking about sanitation? Is there value? That's something that we're definitely trying to do, creating vocabulary. And Lori's saying in the chat box, I don't even think people know they have options. And I think that's so true. And part of it is we're not communicating in a way where people want to know if they have options. So there's kind of these like, where's the first step? And I think the first step is really getting people into a position where they start asking questions. I've put myself in this weird place where I do these wacky fun events, and I cannot tell you how many emails I get, deluges after my classes, or people are like, I have lots of questions because I don't know who else to ask about toilets. Here's my list. Let's talk. And I'm like the toilet confessor because there's no one else there for them to talk to. And I think the industry has really, low tech, high tech, whatever, sanitation in general, especially in the Americas, has really failed the consumers in being approachable and communicative.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I completely agree. And I think that, it's interesting to me that this is still mainly discussed as a public health issue, because it is such an available market space to, for-profit companies who want to innovate and want to sell products at various price points. But as long as we're talking about, as long as the public health practitioners are the ones driving the conversation and, kind of marketing it from that perspective, I think that we're going to kind of hit some dead ends. Whereas, when I was working internationally, a lot of what we were doing is talking not about the public health benefits and why someone should, stop open defecating and dig a latrine, but instead talking about the dignity, talking about how easy it will make their lives. And, it makes me think of those, the early days of like house cleaning products, like the vacuum cleaner. And, you see those old commercials and, they're not talking about it from a cleanliness perspective so much as like a status symbol and, the excitement of it and the ease of it and how much it'll save time. And I think that those are the conversations that, but not us as public health practitioners, but like we as a society need to be driving forward and talking at the same time to the companies that make these products, both on the R&D side and the production side, and saying, there's a large market out there of people who don't know that they have options, but would probably buy them, if they were available to them and if they had the right marketing attached.
Oh, absolutely. I think my question to that is like, who do we need to be targeting to create this change, right? Like, is there one beautiful global public toilet company that would want to champion this going forward? Or do we see it as a grassroots movement, more individual based, or a combination of all three? Like, I think my brain right now is like, these are all great. Like, how do we do this?
I mean, yeah, I think that's why it hasn't happened yet. I think that's the right question. And it's probably both and, driving the demand for these kinds of these options, while also, I think that naturally once the demand is there, the products will follow, because then, R&D follows dollar signs. So I think that that's probably the easiest way for us who have a vested interest in promoting low-tech sanitation would be to drive the demand. But at the same time, yeah, if there are, social entrepreneurs or other businesses that can, help with supporting that supply side, I think that's also beneficial.
Yeah, if I could jump into Julie's point in this discussion and some of the ideas that drive this, the whole public health component, I actually, it hadn't just occurred to me that I don't think that I've ever heard at least my state regulator talk about it in terms of public health. And I know that your idea, get away from that and talk about the convenience of it. But I feel like from a regulatory perspective, there are a lot of barriers, at least in the United States. I can't speak to elsewhere, where we're so concerned, and we should be concerned about protecting the environment, that we ratchet down the actual requirements for these systems to a point that they're completely unaffordable. And we don't have a risk assessment of it. We've adopted the same model for small systems as we have for large municipal systems. And in a lot of cases, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it drives the cost of these systems up, because as soon as you have a regulation in place, anybody who's working on developing these systems shift their focus to make sure that their system can meet those regulations and be available for somebody to purchase. And so I think that there's a discussion within the regulatory community in terms of what drives appropriate technology based on scale and risk associated with it.
And I also would like to chip in on what Julie said, because I completely understand and follow, but at the same time that we are very mindful of this public health side, there's also the risk of happening what happened to Brazil, right? It becomes a very aggressive marketing that doesn't provide, it just provides the old wave, the mainstream sanitation, and in a worse situation. So I think of, someone just mentioned about the Global South. So it's something that is done in Ecuador, and at least in some communities, I don't know if all, but the communities, they get together and they build their sanitation through their funds combined with federal funds they reserve. It's a very interesting experience. It builds community. It builds discussion around what are the options, around what they really want, and how to go from that. So they bring together this community, business, and government side into the sphere of conversation, which I think is very rich.
Paulo, is there like either a link or a name, if people are interested in, they could look that up? Because that, to your point, sounds like a great model.
I will find, I know it's done in, I'll find the link. I was there, so I haven't followed the academics of it, but I'll find the link.
No stress if not, just curious. Because I think that question of how, Julie, to your answer back, it's super difficult to answer the how. And I think we have 3 minutes left. So I think maybe something helpful for people in this room would be solutions that we consider low tech or close to low tech based on our definition earlier, knowing that there's a lot of lenses to be add and to change to some of those definitions. But are there systems that you could get behind today, or ones that you enjoy? And the answer could be no, that they don't exist. But I'm just curious for people joining, maybe one or two that would be a good one to sink your teeth in too.
No one wants to answer that, Kelsey.
I know. It's not a trap, I swear. I wasn't setting for it to be a trap. But I think that's an answer in itself. I think when we look at low-tech sanitation, or at some point getting to a world where there is not low tech and high tech sanitation, I think is what we're all aiming for here, in terms of systems that can change degree based on how circular you want to be, your price point, and where you are regionally. And I think that's where we end up. And I think there are some systems that might be close, but they're not hitting those 3 big points. They're not hitting the affordability, or they're not hitting what the end user wants in terms of usability or dignity or status building. And I think, to your point earlier, Jazz, about like some directory or system that not only compares options but shows people's option, I think is a really great next step forward. We have 1 minute, and I think we did great on time, so I want to applaud everyone. Oh, Kim, go ahead.
I want to respond to some of the things people are saying in the chat box too. There's this conversation about how the global north doesn't have to think about sanitation. I think that's kind of a misconception. I think it's privileged people living in urban and suburban parts of the global north don't have to think about sanitation. So just, I mean, acknowledging the fact that I think most of us on this call probably fit in that bucket. So when we think about, you know, people living in Appalachia who don't have good sanitation solutions and are desperate to get something, people in Alabama, Catherine Coleman Flowers wrote that giant, not giant as in size, but a really important book recently about how the global south, the south of the US is really struggling with finding sanitation solutions that are equitable and friendly to, you know, Jazz and Julie's point. So I think the challenge is a lot of the dialogue around sanitation in the US in particular and in Canada are really focused on the privileged people who already have systems and don't think about it. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who are thinking about it, but don't really have opportunities to connect into the conversation because there's not really a platform or a market for them to have that dialogue.
Very well said.
Maybe if I can react on that. To be honest, I'm learning so much now, and thank you very much for this. And I mean, I will build a new bathroom like in few months, and I never even thought about that I could have an option just to do something else than just plug the regular toilets to the system, and that's all. It never occurred to me, and I think I'm thinking, and you know, I know about sanitation or at least water, access to water, and I'm just like, I think most of the people, it will never be something that they will think about, and I would love to know about my options. Like, just like, yeah, I would love to. I think it's super interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, hopefully this is just a beginning. Thank you for everyone who's joined. Just putting all of our information out here. I know we are all very passionate about this topic and would love to continue it in some form. So feel free to connect or follow with us. But thank you for joining, and thank you to all of my panelists. It's been a great time chatting with you about toilets this Thursday. But thank you, everyone, and have a great day.